Before we get started, I want to point out that this video will include spoilers for the recently released Superman movie. If you haven't seen the movie yet and want to know absolutely nothing going into it, I recommend you stop the video right here, because in today's video we will be discussing next year's Supergirl, some of the unspoken details about this character in the DC universe, and why this version of Supergirl will be different from every other on-screen interpretation we've seen so far. So yesterday, James Gunn shared the first teaser image of Millie Alcock as Supergirl. The first time we saw her on screen as the character was last week when Superman released, and she had her brief cameo at the end of the movie. Now, I've seen a couple people say that the cameo was disrespectful and that it's played too much for laughs, but I can't disagree with this take more. I disagree with it almost as much as not leaving a like on this video. Because while the scene itself was pretty comical, it does shed some light on the really traumatic backstory that Supergirl has. I've hinted at this in my earlier videos, but Supergirl does have a really interesting and very sad backstory compared to Superman. Now, there are two very different origins that this character tends to follow, and they're separated by the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline. If you're unfamiliar, the Crisis storyline kind of acted as a reboot of the DC continuity in the mid-80s, and one of the landmark moments in the storyline was the death of the original version of Supergirl. Now, in the pre-Crisis storyline, Supergirl, also known as Kara Zor-El, was born sometime after the destruction of Krypton on Argo City. Argo City was a fragment of Krypton that survived the destruction of the planet. Kara was raised on Argo City until her teenage years, when the city faces destruction by a meteor shower. Kara is then packed up similar to her cousin Kal-El and is sent to Earth to be raised by her older cousin. Now, as I said, that was the pre-Crisis origin, and there are people who really enjoy that origin of the character, but I think the changes made to the post-Crisis origin really separated Supergirl as a character from Superman. Yes, they are both from the same planet and have the same power set, but their backgrounds are completely different. Now, the Silver Age version of Supergirl, the pre-Crisis that we've already talked about, did come from a time where it was really as simple as creating another version of the same character. She was created at a time when comic books weren't seen as a serious medium of art. They were a distraction for kids, making the creation of Supergirl more of a marketing decision than an actual desire to tell a story about this character. So when she was reintroduced in the post-Crisis timeline, she received a much more tragic origin. And while there have been significant changes between each DC relaunch that we've seen since the reintroduction of the character, the main thing that has been a constant is this character's really tragic upbringing. In newer versions of the story, she's older than Kal-El, has memories of Krypton. Some of the origins maintain that Argo City continued to exist after the destruction of Krypton, though others, such as the New 52 relaunch, reinterpret the origin as Kara being sent to Earth at the same time as Kal-El in order to watch over him, but gets stuck in suspended animation on the journey, finally landing on Earth once Kal-El has already become Superman. Now, when we meet the DCU version of Kara in Superman, we learn a few things about her. James Gunn elaborated on the fact that she's a bit of a mess right now. She enjoys partying on planets with a red sun so she can get drunk. Krypto is her dog. She most likely traveled to Earth with Krypto, and it doesn't seem like she's made her public debut similar to Superman. Now, this is the big separation between Superman and Supergirl, and really ties into the comic that the upcoming movie is going to be based on. The comic run being 2021 Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow by Tom King. Now, before I continue, I highly recommend you read this comic run. I'm going to be talking about some of the events from the run, so if you really want to read a Supergirl story ahead of the movie's release, that's the one to look out for. Now that I've given you your fair spoiler warning, I also have to apologize if I get any of the minor details wrong. I'm mostly going off memory here, and I read it a little under a year ago. But the story is told from the perspective of Ruth, a young woman that Supergirl meets while celebrating her 21st birthday on a planet orbiting a red sun. Ruth's father was killed by Krem of the Yellow Hills, and is searching for somebody to assist her in taking revenge on Krem. Krem. While Supergirl initially declines the request, Krypto is mortally wounded by Krem, and the two go on a journey across several planets in an effort to find Krem and get an antidote for Krypto. Now, the journey and the relationship between Kara and Ruth is the most interesting part of Woman of Tomorrow. Both of them share similar trauma with having lost their home at a very young age. Kara is young and angry, but tries to mask that trauma, with the journey that the two go on and the relationship they share healing them. And in the movie, I could see this leading to Kara realizing that she does have a destiny in helping her cousin protect the Earth. It's their home now, and she will rise to the challenge of becoming a hero alongside Superman. That's why it was so important to introduce Kara in Superman in such a low state. This is a character who isn't yet ready to be a hero. She is letting her traumatic past define who she is as a person. Unlike Superman, she doesn't have a positive outlook on life. I'm also going to pop up this tweet on screen right now since it introduced an interesting aspect to the character that I didn't even think about. Why did Superman go so hard to save the dog from Lex? Krypto actually belongs to Kara, Clark's drunk superpowered cousin with anger issues. He was saving Lex and all of humanity. And yeah, the first thing she says as soon as she arrives is, "Where's my dog?" Krypto's death could have resulted in Kara destroying the entire planet. So that should give you an idea of where Supergirl will be at the beginning of this movie. Very lost and angry. In this movie, we'll see her go on that journey to become the character that many people are more familiar with. I'm really excited for Supergirl to release. I really like the work of director Craig Gillespie, and this is his first time really doing an action movie since Fright Night in 2011, which, if you haven't seen Fright Night from 2011, it's a great time. The 1980s Fright Night is one of my favorite horror movies of that era, and I think the 2011 adaptation, despite some iffy CGI, is a pretty solid remake. We're gonna wrap up today's video by answering a mailbag question. If you have a question you want me to answer in a future video, leave it down in the comments below with the hashtag mailbag. Today's question comes from Azriel Pax. They ask, the intro to Superman stated that the first metahumans appeared 3 centuries ago. Who were these first metahumans and why did they suddenly start showing up in the 1700s? That is a fantastic question, thank you so much for asking it. And in the comics, there have been metahumans that existed for thousands of years prior to the Common Era. Vandal Savage is technically considered the first metahuman, having gained his abilities during the prehistoric times. And like your question says, what we know about James Gunn's DC universe so far is that the first metahuman started appearing 3 centuries ago. And when they say started appearing, I'm gonna assume that means like public record. Somebody can actually pinpoint like a newspaper or some kind of written material that references a metahuman existing. Who that could be, we still don't know. What we do know is that Creature Commandos started to illustrate a very different history of the DC universe compared to our own. For example, in the early 1800s, Victor Frankenstein actually existed and created Eric Frankenstein and the Bride. Currently, those are the earliest examples of metahumans that we've met so far, but we also know from the mural in the Hall of Justice that an earlier version of the Justice Society of America has existed, and as we also know from Creature Commandos, G.I. Robot was created to fight in World War II. Now, if we're talking about in comic continuity, if we look at the 18th century in DC comic history, the one character who could potentially be the one that they're referring to is Miss Liberty, a hero who fought during the Revolutionary War. Though in the comics she was not an enhanced character, it's possible she could have been the first documented case of a costumed hero existing in the DC universe. Thank you so much for your question though. I know I wasn't able to give you a definite answer, but I think there are a few good possibilities in there. And a reminder, if you want to leave your own question for me to answer in a future video, drop it down in the comments below with the hashtag mailbag. That's gonna do it for today's video though. I want to thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like on the video, let me know what you think about this video down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.